Over the last few days, Portland, Oregon has had the worst air quality of any other city in the world, which means there's a Portland resident with a man bun who's busy writing the air a bad Yelp review.
This week is New York Fashion Week. Americans are dying for tips on how to dress up sweatpants for a flirty night in front of the refrigerator.
As coronavirus cases fall in other regions, there's a big surge in the Midwest, which is not surprising. The Midwest is also just now getting into jeggings and MySpace.
Do you want to just switch?
Yeah, we could just switch.
Haley and Justin Bieber celebrated their 2-year wedding anniversary. The Earth responded by continuing to set itself on fire.
Why don't you take the next one, too?
Canada is reporting 0 deaths from coronavirus for the first time since March. It appears that, like the rest of the world, the coronavirus has just forgot about Canada.
And finally, President Trump has agreed to participate in a debate moderated by podcast host Joe Rogan. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has agreed to a debate with his couch cushions moderated by Ed Sullivan. The Trump Report starts now. Welcome to the Trump Report, coming to you early in the morning because we recorded it last night. But that's all right. What could possibly happen overnight that could change what we would want to talk about? I say that because I'm sure that by doing
California will not exist tomorrow.
Does it even exist right now? It's hard to say.
Right.
But with us, as always, the one, the only, Scott Moore down there in the box. I can see him. And of course, my fellow mirth maker, Tamra Brown.
Hey there.
We appreciate having all of you there. So we're here in California, and Scott and I, in our last show, we were talking about 122-degree temperatures and that sort of thing. And we have now, you've seen these memes going around about the orange skies above San Francisco and how it literally looks like the cityscape in Blade Runner 2049. So the future has come much sooner than we thought it would. But, here and in really throughout the West, there's a lot of, there's these issues with just the air quality. Los Angeles had its worst air quality day in like 30 years, which is saying something. My sister lives in Seattle, and they can actually, smell the smoke in the air from Oregon. And yes, I know it's the next state over, but it's far enough where that's still impressive to me. So it's basically the entire Eastern Seaboard. Scott and I talked about this in this sense because unfortunately there were still all the fires last week. This would seemingly be a great time, Tamra, for people to put aside what may or may not have caused global warming and maybe just, okay, now we're going to try and figure out what we can do about it. But are you surprised?
So you believe global warming exists?
Well, yeah, exactly. Are you at all surprised that there's still a majority of the country that is very much disinterested? And do you agree with President Trump that it's really forest management would actually be the solution to the forest fires? And I mean, just in a quick follow-up, what also do you say about the time-honored slogan from one Smokey T. Bear, who said that only you can prevent forest fires? What do you think about all of that?
How am I supposed to find out what gender baby I'm going to have? Smokey the Bear.
You know what? This is a really good point. It's, yeah. Look, if we can't have a colorful announcement.
I don't think Smokey the Bear was considering that I have a registry and people need to know whether to buy the baby onesies in blue or pink. So if, a few 100,000 acres have to burn for the sake of knowing what color to paint the nursery, then so be it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can possibly find a silver lining to the fires, but you did find something that would stop the protests in Portland and bad air quality. That was it. They were like, all right, we're staying home. We just can't possibly get this ensemble covered in ash. Scott, what are some of the more troubling things you're hearing as these fires spread? Is it the idea that forest management could be is really the only solution?
No, of course not. And look, you hear a lot of stuff like we talked about since last week. Especially up in Portland, Oregon, that there was arson involved. And yes, with every fire, there's always some arson involved because people are just, lack of a better word, stupid and irresponsible. And this goes beyond the gender reveal party. It's people purposely starting fires. But some of these rumors were spreading faster than wildfires last week, with it being Antifa and BLM movements and all these other things that were going on. And then between that and then blaming the forest management on the state of California, which of course also is pretty laughable in the sense that over 60% of forest land in the state of California is actually owned by the federal government. So if you're going to be talking about forest management, they need to go right back to the federal government and Donald Trump. And in that press conference yesterday, it was rather embarrassing with the way Trump was, and basically downplayed it, blamed the forest management, and then went on to say about how it's going to get cooler in a couple months, which is a thing called fall and winter, which we all know about. So it doesn't explain, again, the situation we're in with record-breaking temperatures, the most fires ever acreage-wise in the state of California, and up in Oregon and Washington as well. My dad was actually in Idaho last week. He was flying back, and they were one of the last flights out when they left Spokane, Washington last week, and he said it was just the eeriest thing he's ever seen. And he's a pilot and flown all over the world, and he said it was just crazy, the smoke thickness, and it was just in the middle of the day you could hardly see. And this was over going into Idaho, so it's definitely a pretty serious thing, yeah, for sure, out here.
Well, Tamra, what do you think about the idea that it'll just cool down and that'll put out the fires? It sounds reminiscent to that day that we're going to wake up and the coronavirus will be gone. Remember, there is going to be that day.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll also wake up. Do you think it's possible? This is a really serious question, Tamra. Can the coronavirus put out the fires?
The coronavirus put out the fires. If we all sneeze at once,
Yeah,
all gather around.
You just solved it. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it will get better when the temperature's cool, sure, but who knows if this is going to be one of those years where I'm going through the corn maze just before Thanksgiving and it's still 95 degrees outside. So it's only going to get worse. It's going to start soon. Once we're into 2021, we're probably going to start having fires in spring also. And then, of course, when we're in winter, Australia is in summer and they're going to have another epic fire season too. So, half of the world is going to be on fire at one time or another, and it's just going to be taking turns, and this is the new normal. So,
well,
have a cheeseburger.
Well, I mean,
it was basically what we talked about.
Thing anybody's ever said on the
we talked about last week.
The most sensible thing anybody's ever said on the show is to solve our problems with a cheeseburger. By the way, I'm glad to hear you finally talking some sense. I'm sorry, what were you saying, Scott?
No, I was saying it was what we kind of we talked about last week, is the fact that we're seeing this around the world, and with the bushfires in January in Australia, but even right now the Atlantic is having the busiest hurricane season and pace on record. Now the storms right now, thankfully, are not as strong as they were in 2005, but we're rolling through that alphabet. We have only one more letter left in the alphabet before we go into the Greek alphabet. So it's it's something when you start looking at the big picture around the world. We're not even just talking about the wildfires. We're talking about storms, and right now Hurricane Sally's going to be making landfall. And again, the slow-moving storms that we've seen over the past couple of years that have record-breaking flooding. Even though Sally's not as intense of a storm as Laura was a few weeks ago, you're going to see some historic flooding in that part of the country, in the Gulf Coast. in reminiscence of Harvey a couple years ago, and even Imelda last year. So, I mean, it's just seeing these slow-moving storms and these other extreme weather events that are happening more and more around the world.
We're going to have to start naming fires like we do hurricanes, because they're just so common now. Like, we don't know which fire. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also serious, because we're not able to tell the difference between this fire or that fire. They have a couple of them have like Camp 2 fire because there was one previously and stuff like that. Like, if we name the fires, then I think more people would grasp how many and how often it is a little bit better.
Well, yeah, I mean, when they just say the fire and they give a location, like, I don't know which Oregon fire is which, you know. I mean, I know that there's fires throughout Oregon, but I don't actually know the difference. I mean, even in California, I'm not quite sure which are which, you know. So,
I mean, I'm not either. There's a few right around us, and it's hard to keep track of them. Like, we really do need to start naming them like hurricanes.
Well, here's the solution. Wildfire bingo will start next week. I'll print up the cards. Everybody can play at home, and then we'll see what we see. So, shifting to something I mentioned in passing was there's the revelation from we're getting more of the greatest hits from the Bob Woodward book Rage, which President Trump apparently read in the night, which, you know, he strikes me as a guy who reads really fast. I don't have any questions about that. But you know, he of course, and we talked about this last week too, Scott, that you know, he's like, yeah, you know, where are your tapes? Oh, here's my tapes. This is you talking. And there's a couple things about that. One, Jared Kushner's like, oh yeah, well, I was taping too. And it's like, well, great. That's great. You have a tape of the same thing that I have. So we can hear your tape, and your tape is your voice louder than mine, and in my tape, my voice is louder than you. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jared. You can see that Ivanka did not marry up, as they say. When, you know, she definitely settled for Jared. He went to Jared because he's Jared. But we have, thank you. So we have the you know, the revelation that he told, and we talked about this a little bit, that he played down the virus. But the reason why I'm spending the time on this again is that there was the ABC town hall earlier tonight, hosted as described by Laura Ingraham. It was hosted by Clintonite George Stephanopoulos. And it also might as well have been produced by the DNC, also according to Laura Ingraham. And Bill Kristol had a funny tweet, which was, yes, he was ambushed by regular Americans, you know, some of whom voted for him 4 years ago. But, you know, obviously, you know, it's probably, you know, some tough questions. These aren't the kind of questions he gets at his tarmac rallies. So there were a lot of questions about the virus. And he said, you know, I'm fascinated because this has been the approach for 4 years. I didn't play down the virus. I played up the virus. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's his answer. And then he kind of just moves on, you know, and when talking about the racial problem in the country, he said, well, I don't have a problem with race. Ask anybody who knows. So it's like completely just disregarding the topic, and you know, it's just like it's not even sleight of hand. It's like a magician who's juggling like one ball in the air. Like, look, do you see this? Like, yeah, we see what you're doing. And it's so what do you think? I'll ask you first, Scott, sort of about this. I didn't play down the virus. I played up the virus. Huh? Is that what he's expecting to bring to the debate moderated by Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I know. Well, I was going to say, like, I think that's been his tactic all along, has been to, and you can go back even with the Hillary Clinton one, when in the debates in 2016, where, you know, she was talking about him being a Russian puppet, and he's like, no, you're the puppet. You know, it's like his comebacks are always like, either just pretend like he didn't say it, just project it back on the other person, or go back and say, no, I heard that whole quote about him saying that. Yeah, it's just, I think he's going to have a harder time doing this when his own voice was on the tapes. You know, it's one thing where you can kind of go on and say it's fake news, like even the Atlantic article, but it's another when you hear his own voice and his own words saying this, and then he continues to do this. And some of those real voters tonight were definitely giving back a little bit of the attitude, like enough is enough. Like one woman, he tried to, I only listened to clips here and there, but he was trying to speak and he kept interrupting her, and she was finally like, no, sir, I have not finished my question yet. So this is something he's not been used to. And we've talked about this already, is that even though Biden is not definitely in tip-top shape when it comes to debating, Trump has definitely not as well. He has not had to do any kind of debating at all this year during the primaries. At least Biden had to do that. He has not done anything. And to see that he is not prepared at all. And the first debate with Joe Biden is only 2 weeks from tonight. So it's going to be really interesting to see. He doesn't feel the need to practice or prep or do anything. So it'll be interesting to see how he comes in for this debate in 2 weeks.
For a bit of a dated niche reference, he is definitely Allen Iverson when it comes to talking about practice. He doesn't need to talk about practice. He doesn't need to practice because he's a president. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, he's very rarely challenged in any way other than in the press room. But that's still, his turf is the press room. Mm-hmm. He can bully a reporter and try and make them take off their mask. Which is, just kind of reminding you that he's basically like a Batman villain. Come on, take off your mask, show everybody who you are. What do you think, Tamra? Sort of this, you take a comment about playing down the coronavirus. No, I play it up. And specifically, it was an African-American voter who said that the Make America Great slogan is tone deaf, and you haven't acknowledged there's a race problem in this country, to which he responded with, "There's none with me." So he's just saying, like, hey, it's not my problem. I mean,
he's an appallingly bad speaker. We've talked about that, constantly. But with what came out with the Bob Woodward, what's been released, he said he was given this information and he was trying to keep the American people from panicking. I think that that's a reasonable, whether or not that's the correct response, I'd say presidents have or would possibly take that approach. The thing about Trump is that anytime he does anything remotely reasonable, he ruins it by saying something like, I didn't play it down, I played it up, or just by being so self-congratulatory that you cannot ever acknowledge anything reasonable or acknowledge anything, like, oh, I can see where you were coming from with that. Like, it's impossible to do that if you are a logical person, because he's his own worst enemy by, insisting on hey, I made it so that artists on Spotify are going to be getting a larger portion of their royalties. Aren't you glad that Trump did that for you? And well, I was until you said that. Like he can't. That is why Trump is a president unlike Bush, any previous Republican, where maybe Democrats didn't like didn't agree with the previous Republican presidents, but it is absolutely impossible to give Trump credit for anything, because he always has to tag whatever he did with something absolutely insane that overshadows what actually happened. I didn't play down the virus, I played it up. So now that's what we're going to focus on, rather than we could take his word that he was trying to, preserve America from panicking, which that's not a bad thing at all.
Well, and it's like we were talking after his speech at the RNC. It's like, you can't just say, look at the numbers for unemployment for Black Americans. He always has to say, no president has done as much.
All time ever, in all
everything always has. Mm-hmm, so it's like, if you could point to the things. Mm-hmm. And if Chelsea were here, she would probably tell me that, none of the things he can point to are actually accomplishments. But even the strongest accomplishments you have, he always has to say, well, this is the best ever. And I'm not quite sure what is the best ever. I guess if you were speaking to the national American convention of air polluters, they would probably be like, yeah, this is the best ever year for us, because just look at the amount of particles in the air. You know, this is just reminding us what we can live with. I wanted to talk about something that I thought was actually very funny, where President Trump was on Fox and Friends this morning, which is not surprising. But during the course of the interview, he said multiple times that this was the first of what's going to be a weekly appearance. And that came as news to the hosts. Brian Kilmeade, being Brian Kilmeade, was all on board. But even Steve Doocy, when you've lost Steve Doocy, you've definitely started to lose the country, because he's like, basically saying, yeah, we'll see about that. We're going to take it as a case-by-case basis. He didn't
It's like,
jump.
hey, we've got Nugent next week, and we really don't want to bump him. So
I mean, honestly, I would much rather hear what Nugent has to say, especially if he's going to be reading recipes from his Kill It and Grill It cookbook for the American Sportsman. I would probably think that would be a higher rated segment. But yeah, you're basically telling the sitting president, we're not that into you, okay? And I mean, look, there could easily be a miscommunication somewhere. There could be a producer that told someone at the White House, is like, yeah, we'll definitely do this every week. And I find it hard to believe that if you see the hotlines ringing and you're like, it's that 202 number there. Oh, it's Trump again? Nah, we're not going to take it. I think if he calls every week, they're going to take it. But I did find it funny that this came as news to at least one of the, well, really none of the hosts seemed to know. Just one of them was happier about it. What does that tell you about the state of the Trump operations, and sort of, basically the person handling his press? You would think that would be the person who has everything the most buttoned down in the administration. Tamra.
yeah, I mean, it's like when he said he was going to throw out the first pitch for the Yankees. It's like that's what makes him such a terrible speaker, is he just has no filter. There's no such thing as an unexpressed thought. It just comes right out, and he says things before by saying he was going on there every week, I'm sure he just thought of it a second before he said it, and so he was as surprised as everybody else was by anything like that.
If he would like to steer his Fox News time towards us, I don't want to speak for either of you, but I'd be happy to ask him a couple of questions if Steve Doocy is playing hardball and doesn't want to talk to him. Come on, I can think of a couple things I'd like to ask him about. Now, to be fair, almost all of my questions would be about Celebrity Apprentice. Sure. Like, why does he think that Dennis Rodman didn't do better? What was it like to be in a room with Gene Simmons? I have a lot of questions about Celebrity Apprentice. But there's some narratives out there from President Trump when it comes to Joe Biden. And one of them is this idea that he takes a drug test before the debate, which, as Scott pointed out, is 2 weeks from tonight. Or by the time people see it, I guess in the morning, 2 weeks from last night, wink. But the idea that he's taking performance enhancing drugs, I don't know what you think, Scott, but if he's taking performance enhancing drugs, he should probably take more of them. If he's taking things to make him sharper, to seem less befuddled conversationally, and better prepared to take tough questions, I don't think he's taking the appropriate dosage for a man his size. What do you think about this this idea? What is President Trump trying to do with this specific sleight of hand about old slow Joe needing to take performance enhancing drugs?
But I mean, it goes back to what we say time and time again. When you look, and this is in general, not just Trump just brings it to a whole new level. But so often when you see people project on someone else, it's their own issues. And you see this again and again. It's like the media is crooked, Hillary's crooked, this person's a liar, that person's that. Joe Biden's slow and old and confused, and it's like you go back and you see all the things that Trump says and does, and that's where it almost becomes comical when you see this continue to happen with him. But that's all Trump knows how to do, is project onto other people and try to distract And even, I mean, even as sad as it is, a lot of these the peace deals and everything for today, I'm always thinking like, okay, he's distracting from other things. The nearly 200,000 that have died now from COVID in the U.S. and some of the other issues that are going on, and the negativity from the Atlantic article and the Woodward with him on tape saying he's downplaying COVID. So now it's like, oh, distract here with this other shiny object of look at all this stuff that we're doing now with peace in the Middle East kind of thing. So whenever you see just the comments, and I see this with fellow Republicans too, just tearing down Joe Biden. But it's like, hi, when you see Trump and he can barely put two words together, and you see him try to do a speech and he's sweating, and I mean everything about it is just comical. It's one thing if you had someone like Trump and it was Trump, Donald Trump Jr. running, and you're someone that's younger and you could say, okay, look at this person compared to Biden. But when you have someone who's basically the same age, it makes it almost comical when you're trying to project what you think on the other person when you yourself are having the same exact issues.
Yeah, I mean, he's not even the best public speaker in his own family.
Not at all.
I would say that he's much stronger than Eric. He's stronger than Tiffany. But apart from that, I think Melania has better speechwriters than he does. So, I think that there are definitely a lot of questions about that. And I talked about this when we were talking about the campaign, is the way that he slouches and like holds onto the podium for dear life. I don't think enough people are talking about that. Look, he's 73 and, you can talk about old Sleepy Joe being 77, but you're not that much younger. And I think that I don't know what and for some reason we're supposed to not talk about him putting on weight, but it's very clear that he's not doing the whole 30 over these last 4 years, unless of course it's referring to the 30-piece chicken McNugget. I just thought of that now. I'm really proud of myself. And I look, generally the people who get upset about fat shaming probably are not going to be people who defend the president. So I can stand by a comment like that. Tamra, another thing that President Trump is trying to add onto the fire, which of course is coal fire, obviously, because we're America, is this idea that Joe Biden is not the one in charge of the ticket. He's been referring to the Harris-Biden ticket, which Kamala Harris did actually have a little slip up, and she used that phrase. So that's all it takes for Trump to run with it.
What phrase?
To refer to the ticket as Harris Biden. So
yeah.
What do you think is the none too subtle point that President Trump is trying to make by saying that it's the Harris Biden ticket?
It's this, when Bill Clinton was president, people used to call him Billary, and they'd say that she was the one that was really calling the shots. I mean, it's just the way that if there's a woman that is behind the man, it's a misogynist microaggression to say we got to make sure she's the one that's really in charge there, and that's what we got to look out for. It's just planting the seed for Kamala's eventual takedown when she is running for president. That the same people who are like, oh no, I support women, just not that woman, are going to use those type of phrases to make sure that a woman never gets the position of president. So I think that's what that was.
Yeah, I think that Scott, that the idea is, do you really want a woman in charge? I think that there are some very easy narratives to play up, and I think that that seems to be what this one is. I mean, look, the idea that Biden would not be in charge, I think, he's not the president isn't the only person saying that, but it's more about like, look who would be in charge, though.
Well, I think it's a little both. I mean, yes, I believe there's a little misogyny there, but I also think that it plays into the Joe Biden's too old, he's 77, he's clueless, and now these radical left people are the ones that are really going to be running, and he's just a puppet, and he's, and Kamala Harris represents the far left liberal, crazy wing that's going to come in and really be running the show. If you elect Joe Biden, you're really electing them, and he's just there as the puppet.
At this point,
so
is if the
too.
VP was Tulsi, if the VP was Tulsi,
Mhm.
Trump and the right would still be saying she's the radical left. I mean, it has absolutely no bearing on the reality. That's just their fear tactic.
But their fear tactic, but part of it is, again, playing not just into the misogynistic role, but also playing into the Joe Biden's too old and he's not really going to be running things, and this other person's really going to be running things. And we all know that she's ambitious. I mean, so clearly she was running for president before, so that's not a surprise. But part of it is that their thought is like she represents that progressive San Francisco, California, crazy wing, beyond being just the woman aspect of it, and that he's not really running the show. So that's part of their tactic as well.
Scott, I believe the word you're looking for is Holly weird. I believe that that's the way that America sees it. Tamra, it's interesting you said that if Joe Biden's running mate had been Tulsi Gabbard. If Joe Biden's running mate was Tulsi Gabbard, just imagine what QAnon would do. They just throw up their hands. They wouldn't know what to do. They're like, wait a minute. No. That's our girl. What are we supposed to do? They wouldn't know. They just really wouldn't know what to do. And, QAnon, of course, being too busy trying to make. So I don't know if they're that ready to focus on, a political campaign. All the same, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, went on a tear against mail-in voting. And we got a comment after our last show from Dominicus Saxon. He tweeted at me that he received a letter at home that was addressed to the previous occupant, and it was dated 17 years earlier. So I would say that that letter definitely took a circuitous route.
I wonder what state he lives in.
He lives in Idaho, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But
that would make sense.
I did wonder if it was sent via Pony Express. I do, look, I think a lot of people have anecdotal evidence that there are flaws with the mail system. Somebody, mailed 100 letters. I think it was the LA Times. They mailed 100 letters and the results were not favorable. I will mention that back in August, I had a birthday card and an anniversary card that I sent to my dad returned to me the previous September. So I got it 11 months later, returned to me.
Wow.
The gift cards that had been in there, which were probably somewhere classy like Red Lobster, if I know what I was thinking from my dad, they were not intact, but I got the cards back. And so the moral of this story is that my dad is getting those cards this year. I'll just send them in a nicer envelope and I'll just do electronic gift cards, I suppose. But look, I think a lot of people can have incidents of things like that. People have had.
I think those flukes are on par with whatever fluke there would be with voting in general. Like whether you did it, there's going to be glitches, and those happen to be the glitches. I mean, in California, I got a voter, I don't know what to call it, like correspondence asking if the previous residents still lived here. And it said, you had to check. It was like a courtesy mailer, and it was saying, please help us make our system more efficient and let us know, does this person still live here or not? And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, when I moved to California in 2003 from New York, I don't know about now, but for years I was still on the voter rolls in New York. Like if I somehow wanted to, wake up in the morning in New York and vote and then fly back to California and vote again. Also, since they don't check your ID, it really wouldn't be that hard. So I don't know how common that sort of thing is. But I don't know. Look, I think we're all going to do what President Trump said and vote twice, right? I mean, we're gonna vote in person and do a mail-in ballot. So, I mean, the president said we should do it. So I don't kind of see any reason why we shouldn't.
It doesn't. I mean, I'm voting anyway, but it's not like it matters because California is going to go blue anyway. So I'm voting for the sake of the down ballot, but
Yeah, well, you never know if the wildfires get in the way of the mail trucks. You know, I mean that's probably something that we'll be warned about in the near future. Although
It's
Scott and I
red.
were both talking last week about how we're still inclined to vote in person just because we always do. I mean,
Me too.
obviously I would wear a mask, and
Me too.
I mean if I go to Target, I can go vote in person. You know, and uh, if I could vote at Target, that would actually probably be the best, though. So if
You
Target
might want to
wants,
check on that. I mean, the way that LA County has been changing it so that you can vote at any voting polling place. You don't have to go to your specific
yeah.
place. You might be able to vote at your Target
All right. Well,
or your,
if they put the voting machine by where they make the popcorn at Target, that's going to be exactly what I'm looking for. So, back to Bill Barr for a moment, though. He was angry at Dems for spreading quote crap that President Trump will stay in office and seize power and all that shit. So, what I like is that he used crap and shit in the same sentence, you know, because it's like, I'm working up to it. And I don't know. I don't know that it's a crazy idea. Look, I think that it's not insane to think about, an incumbent president, at least considering like what's within my rights? What am I able to do? I mean, look, especially if the election is as close as people are expecting it to be. If there are questions, it's like, I'm not going anywhere. But Scott, if Bill Barr says we don't have to worry about it, that means we don't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah, he's like the last person that says that I'm going to take for his word, because we see what a great henchman he's become for Donald Trump. But just going back to the voter fraud thing for a second too, it's like I have the same thing as you when I moved out from Florida. I was still on the voter rolls for quite a few years. But again, you can even go back, and Ginsburg, who was the lawyer in the famous 2000 recount with George W. Bush and Al Gore in Florida, who's a Republican, even said there are just not enough, any kind of warrants of enough cases where there's real legitimate voter fraud. There just is not. And sure, I guess you could say that I could hop on a plane and fly to Florida and go vote, and then turn around and then fly back to California and vote, or vote by mail or whatever. But the likelihood of one being able to do that, which means you'd have to have somebody that you knew still living in the residence that you came from to be able to even do that, to be able to, so you have to have so many things are going to have to come up. And then you'd also have to have the resources and the money to be able to go fly somewhere or be able to mail this out to the state. I mean, it just the amount of things that you'd have to do just to get that one vote is quite astronomical and just not realistic. And then going back to Bill Barr, of course, I mean, there's so many, and I take it not just that Trump's going to lose, and he's going to stay in office, because of course there's going to be mechanisms in place, but with the power of incumbency and the power of the federal government behind you, there are so many things that they can do to make sure that the election isn't clean, in the sense of, you could have different electors from going in, different slates of electors going in January when it comes to finalizing electoral college. You could be holding up lawsuits. You could come back and say, in some Republican-leaning states that are close, that we're done with the recounts, and hopefully that the state, Supreme Court will agree with you. There's a lot of things that you can do as an incumbent that then Bill Barr could be like, well, look, he did all this stuff. This is legitimate. There was fraud. There were other things. And now that's how he finds a way to win. Whereas, if he clearly loses, those options are off the table. And yes, there is going to be a limit to what he can do. And the Constitution says at noon on January 20th, the term for president and vice president ends. So if there is not a resolution, then Nancy Pelosi becomes president. And that's how it works. There is no way you just can add to the clock and have overtime. It is written in the Constitution. So there are certain things that he will not be able to do. But him and Bill Barr will be able to work a lot of other things in their favor with the power of the federal government and state governments that are Republican, that will be able to, lean in their direction when it comes to certain things. So that's where I am saying that Bill Barr is not including those things, but those are realistic things that they will be able to do to manipulate the outcome of the vote, which is scary. And that's why we keep saying you have to have a landslide win for Democrats just to be able to avoid those type of scenarios, which again, seems very unlikely in our very crazy polarized country.
Right.
I think he should be dragged out of the White House by Al Gore. That's symbolically
Well,
what should happen.
I was going to mention Al Gore actually, because if you remember the results in 2000 and sort of him as the sitting vice president, as essentially the president of the Senate presiding over the electors, he really stood as one that was trying to do any of the things that you're talking about. He decided that for the good of the country, he was going to concede. The Supreme Court did have the voting in Florida stopped, but it came down to so few votes that I feel like there were avenues he could have pursued. It could have been dragged out longer, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Scott, but who was the Speaker of the House in 2000? Because I guess that's somebody who I guess could have become president, but I actually don't remember.
Wasn't it Dennis? Was it that?
Dennis
Dennis
Hastert?
Hastert then? I think it was Dennis Hastert, but I don't know if it was after that. Was it after him? I think it was him. I think, because I know it was definitely a Republican, so it would have been a Republican regardless at that time. But yeah, I remember that vividly because, again, like I said, I voted for Al Gore in Florida in 2000, and I remember how close it was, and I remember how long it was dragged out. And I will say this time around, from what I've read about and heard, the Democrats are not going to do anything like that. That they are going to take every single opportunity, if they feel that they have an opportunity to do so, to be able to make sure all those votes are counted, and that they're building a robust legal team in preparation for this, which is good to hear. That they're if they have to get down in the mud and play dirty, because we know that they're not going to just sit back and say, okay, we are just going to go ahead and acquiesce. That it sounds like they're also going to make sure that they're going to be making every vote count and keep that overtime going as long as possible. Because as we just said, if Nancy Pelosi has to become president come January 28th, at least there'll be a Democrat there. And at that point, depending on how the election goes, the House and potentially the Senate could also be Democratic as well. So, that's going to make a big difference. The bigger issue is really going to be that Electoral College and being able to get those slates of electors finalized in the Senate, and that's going to be a very interesting thing to see if anything kind of switches from there, and what kind of games they may try to play.
In a scenario where Nancy Pelosi were to be president, I for one would be looking forward to all the haircut tweets that we would be getting, because there would be plenty of them.
Are we going to have a civil war in January? Is that what's going to happen? A second civil war? I mean, who would be surprised at this point?
I think that
there's too many people that are too lazy to get into a full-fledged war. So that's the only thing going in our favor.
I think that
digital civil war. I think we've moved beyond combat civil war. It's going to definitely be like a digital you know what I mean?
Well, we do everything. Yeah, we do everything digitally these days. So it would be the biggest Zoom war that the world ever saw. But to that end, Tamra, I'm just sort of wondering about some of your thoughts about the lawsuits. And for me, I've thought about this, that I think whoever we think has won the election, maybe not even on election night, but like say the next day, I think that whoever we think wins in the immediacy, it's going to be the other guy. I think whoever feels like they lost is the one who's like more motivated to figure out every avenue, bring in more lawyers and figure it out. And so, and I think that having that result overturned, that would bring us our digital civil war. We're not going to wait till January. We'll definitely get it in time for Thanksgiving. There's going to be no Macy's parade this year, so there'll probably be, some kind of unrest. But what are your thoughts on sort of all of this when it comes to the questions about how close the election could be, Tamra?
I have been saying that Trump is going to win, and I still think that is the case. Even though Biden's ahead in the polls, it's not going to be that simple. There's going to be everything that we just talked about. So I think that the Democrats are going to be the ones to take the high road if it comes to being, like Al Gore did, just say, I'm going to concede. I think that's what's going to happen.
Do you think that that President Trump would
go on a gloat parade afterwards? Yes, absolutely.
How do you think he would receive the way that George W. Bush was given a call to concede, and then a follow-up call like saying, well, actually not so fast. I actually don't concede. And how do you think President Trump would handle getting I feel like he wouldn't take the second call, actually. He's like, no, you already conceded. I heard it. You all heard it because, of course, I was recording it. Jared had a microphone held up. Sounded better than Bob Woodward's. How do you think President Trump would handle, either receiving or making a concession call?
Who?
I was speaking to you, Tamra.
How would Trump handle a concession call? I don't think he would make it. I don't see him making a concession speech. I don't see that happening in any stretch of my imagination. I can't see that happening.
Let just hypothetically, on election night, he knows he's lost, and it's in a way where the lawyers are like, look, we'll be happy to work the billable hours, but you won't win. I think he would just be like, well, then fuck it. Tell all those losers to go.
I think Ivanka's going to do it for him. That's
home,
what
like
he's
whoever's
not gonna...
assembled to see him speak, because he'll have a huge... He's not going to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, then you're able to say forever, it's like, well, everybody knew that I really won, but again, I don't know that I see that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, I would take it off the page of when Ford lost to Carter and it was super close. And Ford claimed that he had no voice left. And so, Betty basically went up and gave the concession speech for him, and he's in the back, and you could see how devastated the whole family looked. But she basically did that because she said, oh, he'd lost his voice. Well, I think it was just the fact that he was so distraught that he couldn't do it. So I do kind of agree with you in that sense, Tamra, that it could be very easy for Ivanka to say this kind of the same thing, taking a page from President Ford's book, losing the election in a very close race to Jimmy Carter. And there was a chance, and he was starting to pull back even, where Carter was way ahead, for the longest time, and it got down to like 1 or 2 points. And it was also one of the closest elections in the Electoral College. But I would disagree with the sense that the person that is ahead, I believe, on election night will have the motivation to be able to carry that forward. So if Biden is leading on election night, then I think that he will have the momentum than the other way around, because the person who's losing, it's a lot harder to change that momentum. And that's just how it's going to appear in the media. That's how people are going to look at it. Like, okay, this person is winning. And then I'd also say if Biden is winning on election night, the likelihood that he goes on to win is a lot greater than Trump. Because as we've seen now with the mail-in voting and stuff, that Republicans are just not going out at this point to do early voting or to go and do mail-in voting. So if you see that there's going to be a lot of mail that's still coming in, and we've seen this in elections past too, this is not a new phenomenon. It's just greatly exaggerated now because Trump is basically telling Republicans and people don't go out and vote by mail. But when you see that in general, a lot of the numbers end up changing in the favor of Democrats when you have close races on election night. So I would say two-pronged, that if whoever the winner is on election night is going to look more like the winner in the long term regardless, compared to the underdog. But if it is Biden, then the likelihood is he's going to go on to victory because of those mail-in ballots that are going to skew a lot heavier towards the Democrats. So I think that's the bigger thing.
Who do you think it's going to be?
Well, I will say, I think Donald Trump is definitely not going to win the popular vote again. That's for sure. And I think that's part of the problem, is that if he goes back again and he wins both times without the will of the people, in a sense, and I think he would lose the popular vote by an even larger number. But at this point, the way he won in 2016 was such a unique, specific thing. I just don't know if he can repeat that again. Don't, because he won by such a fluke that I don't know if that can happen.
That actually brings me to the last thing that I wanted to bring up, which comes from an NPR article about how Biden is outspending Trump on TV, but they're really only focusing on 6 states, and I wanted to talk about these states. Most of them make sense: Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. So those are really the 6 states that are going to decide the election, I think. And I think that's really a safe bet.
Absolutely.
I mean, especially because of just the number of electoral votes, Florida and Pennsylvania. Not that the other ones don't have, but I mean, there's so many in those states alone that, look, you can, Scott, you on election night 4 years ago, you colored in a map very nicely for us. I'd say, let's see, we have our 50 states. I would say, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong. I would say 30 of those states you could color in right now and be right. I think you could easily be right about 30, maybe even more, but definitely 30.
I'd say 40 that you can easily do and feel pretty confident with that are not going to change. And then because you have that second tier of those 6 states, which might be New Hampshire, Minnesota, if you really want to go into it. Although one poll today just had Biden ahead by 16. Nevada, which again I don't think is going to be in play either. But you always have a couple of those second tier states that end up being potentially like, oh, they might switch to the other side. So if I was adding a second tier, I'd add that. And if I was going to go even further, then I would put Georgia and then Texas into that mix as well. But, again, when it's all and even those 6 states, it's not much is going to change really when it comes down to it. It's just going to be a few of those states. I don't think all 6 of them will necessarily change, but it's definitely going to be a few of them potentially, but not much. So yeah, I could easily say 40
change. What do you mean from what they are now? What polling shows in those states now? Is that what you mean? Change from what?
I'm changing from 2016.
Oh,
right?
I see.
So
okay.
like the states that like Pennsylvania, the 6 states that are poised.
Yeah, the 6 states I'm talking about: Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona.
Oh.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that more than $700 million have been spent on TV ads in 14 key states, but 85% of that money went to these 6. And the Democrats, the Biden campaign and supporting groups have spent almost 90% of their money on these 6 states, while Trump and Republican organizations have spent 78 cents of every dollar across the 6, which sure that adds up, but they obviously also realize how much the focus is in those places. In terms of that, it is crazy to think about that idea about like those states, but when you think about those states, it's like, oh yeah, but there are sort of like the vastly different concentrations of population. I mean, I think Pennsylvania is such a great example of, you have Philadelphia, and to an extent you have Pittsburgh, but boy, you sure have everything in between that does not.
Amish country.
Yeah. How do the Amish vote? No, I don't mean who do they vote for. I mean literally, how do they vote? I don't even, do they take the buggy into town? I don't even know. But I think it'll be interesting because of just how much of it goes down to those states. I do wonder if it would just perhaps be only fitting if President Trump were to win the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. Yeah. I think just because of what he said so much about the 2016 election, we had a guest on the show a year ago, a woman named Elijah who works for Ben Shapiro, or at least had worked for Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
And I asked her the question that, do you think if President Trump were to win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College, would Republicans finally then start to say, oh, you know what, there's something to be said for that? Because it's already happened to Democrats twice in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So
what'd you say?
So no, I know it's very, very difficult to say, but I think that's what it would take, is for it to happen the other way. And I don't know if it might have to happen more than once. But
no, I've said that, and I've also said that once the main states flip blue, so when you have the 10 biggest states that are consistently blue, like Texas and Georgia, and then Florida's in the mix, there's no other way that a Republican will win without those states. So once you have the consistent change demographically of those big states all being blue consistently, like what we saw with Virginia and Nevada, and it starts happening to some of these Sunbelt states, that's also when Republicans are going to be like, okay, this doesn't work for us anymore. And as I've said time and time again, when they have that majority and everything, that's going to be the first thing they're going to do is do a constitutional amendment to eliminate the Electoral College. So it's incredibly hypocritical, but I know that besides this happening with them, like a Trump type of scenario or another presidential candidate where the roles are reversed, but it's also going to take a consistent change demographically where the biggest states like Texas, Georgia, Arizona, Florida are consistently blue, and then you're going to see them want to get rid of it for sure, because there's no other way that they're going to be able to win without appealing to a broad audience after that.
Are you both, do you feel like you're both able to look at it objectively? I think that I can see the value in having the Electoral College, but do either of you feel like it should be just strict popular vote?
I mean, no, I see the value in the Electoral College. What is it? How did they explain it to us in elementary school? Two wolves and a sheep decide what's for dinner, and that's the reason for the Electoral College.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, look, I understand its purpose and it adds an extra layer, but I also think that at some point, putting aside all the historical context of whatever, was involved with slavery and other issues as to why they put in the Electoral College, I also think at some point there's some ways of revisiting it and that it might be antiquated now for today. I mean, just like senators, they were never voted on until 1913. So, senators were appointed and that changed. And we vote for every single other position by popular vote, by, 50+1. And by having this extra layer, and especially now, it adds to issues that were not really thought of back in those days that can really affect having a president really elected by the people. And we know that they're really not in this type of democracy, in this republic, but there is something to be said about at least revisiting it. I know there's the compact there about states doing that and awarding to the popular vote. But to me, that doesn't work either, because let's say it happened in like 2016, it's reversed and Hillary Clinton won the Electoral College, but then you would have the state of California going red for a Republican because, the popular vote for the country ended up being such a way that, the states had agreed to awarding it to the popular vote, but you're not really awarding it to the people that voted for them in your state. And I also think that having a state go blue or go red, when we forget that there's so many other people in the reddest states in the country, there's so many other places like Salt Lake City in Utah, or Birmingham, Alabama, or Atlanta, Georgia, or places of people that actually have a say never get their voice heard either, because the entire state goes with just a simple majority too. So, there's a lot of things that you could say could be changed when you give a popular vote. Would that help out? Because some of the places in red states or in blue states, like we know here in California, upstate New York, like we were talking about the T of Pennsylvania,
sure,
that's incredibly red. Those people, when a state like Pennsylvania that was consistently blue for 30 years, those people, really don't get their voices heard either. So there is something to be said for both. I think the Electoral College provides a good, just historical context of what we do for separating the way we vote for president. But I think it's definitely something we should look into as we go into the future and what other alternatives we could do.
Yeah, I think I would be more in favor of overturning it if, you consistently had like a disparity of, the person winning the popular vote by like more than 10 million votes, and you could like point to the 10 million votes being spread throughout the country, instead of where it's like,
right,
well, you got 3 million extra votes for Hillary Clinton, and that's the number in California. Being less cut and dry to that. How much of a mess would it be is it Montana and New Hampshire are the ones that do proportionate electoral votes?
It's Nebraska and Maine.
Okay,
and Maine.
So
yeah.
I wasn't right about either of them, but
you were close.
They're both places I don't want to go, so it's the same difference.
Did Maine just rule that they're doing it that way now?
No, they always have. I
think
well, then there's a new state. One state just yeah.
Okay. So,
I know there was. I think Maine was debating about doing ranked voting, which is a whole other way of voting that they've said about bringing into the fold. But they've discussed doing that. But no, Maine and Nebraska have always done that. So it's like I forget if it's Maine which district it is, but it's just a congressional district in both states. And at this point, the one that contains Omaha, again, in Nebraska, a very red state, but Omaha is very blue, could actually go to Biden this time, and it went to Obama in 2008. And same thing with Maine being very blue, but the one district went for Trump in 2016 and will likely potentially go for him again in 2020. And Biden looks to pick up the district in Nebraska where Omaha is. So yeah, it could be 269, 269 too, when you put those two into play, so, which brings a whole other.
Yeah, no, I know. And just thinking if you had more states like that, you'd never get anywhere trying to count the votes, So then I think if you started to divvy them up that way, maybe they would undo the whole thing. Anyway, well, we could talk about this all night / morning. Wink. But we'll be back next week. Make sure if you're a tweeter, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Trump Report ABTV, or you just follow me directly. I'll be sure to let you know when you can find our next episode. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. And Tamra, where can people find you?
Hey, man. In all seriousness, I am blowing up on TikTok. Like, TikTok has treated me better than any app in the last 10 years. So I'm at Hey Tamra Hey on TikTok, and I'm loving it. I'm literally obsessed with this app.
I like that you're bookended by the haze on TikTok.
Yes.
So, and I don't know. I just feel like TikTok's not for me, but I'm glad it's for you, and I'm glad it's true.
I'm too. I don't think that they let my age group in there, but
Scott, where if people do want to talk to you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter still, because I'm still analog apparently, but you can find me at SMan80. That's SMan80.
Yes, and like I said, at ChristianDMZ, that's also my Friendster and my MySpace, so you can find me there. Thanks again to everybody who watched and commented, as always. If you're watching the archived version, which you all are, please leave comments down below. I always enjoy interacting with people who comment, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.